previously, we had covered the repatriation of Mexicans during the Great Depression. Mexicans were the scapegoats for America's financial crisis. So in the 1930s, that Mexican generation, that generation's experience with labor recruitment and then deportation is very crucial to understand because it reveals the cycles of change that will continue to the present day. And so I had asked you to remember something about these cycles of change, that whenever there are economic labor necessities in the United States, the remedy becomes Mexican migration. And Mexican migration stimulates a movement of people to the United States. This is the cycle of change, because ultimately, with regards to Mexicans, the notion is the United States can't live with them, and of course, they can't live without them. So whenever there are economic labor necessities in the United States, the remedy becomes Mexican migration, which stimulates a movement of people to the United States. When those labor needs are satisfied, there oftentimes occurs an economic downturn, which results in immigration restriction and deportation. Now, this process occurs again when the United States is in need of labor. So it's important to understand this cycle because it occurs numerous times in the 20th century. Now, today's controversy is but a reflection of this historical cycle. What Trump is mouthing off, what this administration is doing with regards to the immigrant experience and the Mexican immigrant, it's nothing new. It is not anything new. It is a part of an experience of every generation of Mexicanos that have been living in the United States since the U.S. takeover. And so, for Mexicanos, it must be faced. For Chicanos, it must be faced. American society has this inborn hatred for things Mexican. And it stems from the war. It began with the U.S. war with Mexico in 1846, of which the United States refuses to take a look at. And it continues to this day, especially along the border that was created by this war. So we can see this cycle appear again in the form of what would be known as the Bracero Program and then Operation Wetback. So let's start with the Bracero Program. As World War II commenced, the labor market structure changed as the federal government took over the economy. Individual growers were increasingly monopolizing the market as they moved into what became known as agribusiness. Now, growers had a problem. How do you maintain cheap labor forces at peak harvest periods during the war? See, many native Mexicano farm workers were drafted, or they were attracted to urban areas where higher paying industrial jobs proliferated. As we will see, the relocation of Japanese to concentration camps likewise is going to create a gap in the labor force in agriculture. So the farmers were in a dilemma. Are they going to lose crops and profits due to labor shortages? Or they're going to increase wages to attract workers, which of course, for any capitalist, you increase the wages, they immediately react because it's going to increase or it's going to decrease their profits. It's going to cut into their profits. But meanwhile, the federal government is putting pressure on agribusiness for more production for the war effort. So the growers are going to respond by putting pressure on the federal government for a plan. The United States is going to turn to Mexico to fulfill the economic need. So, of course, in the 1930s, after deporting Mexicans en masse, the United States government is going to go to Mexico and ask, can we borrow those workers? Can we borrow those workers? So in the 1930s, the U.S. is deporting over 1 million. Now, in the 1940s, the United States comes back to Mexico and says, can you bring them back? So the plan called for a regulated immigration policy. It was a contracted form of migration. So the Bracero Program was a result of a plan by growers at the federal level in conjunction with Mexican officials. It was a plan that was funded by American taxpayers. Agribusiness became subsidized by the federal government. And it became known as Public Law 45, and it was passed in 1943. It was a bilateral, binational agreement. It was to be a temporary program. It was supposed to be used when in need of labor. It was to end when the war was over. Mexican workers were not to displace domestic workers. Mexican workers were exempt from military service. Mexican workers were not to be, get this, they were not to be discriminated against.